It's October 19th, 2020, and I'm looking at Google Books, which has preserved an article entitled Invisible Glories of the Heavens by E.W. Maunder, FRAS, of the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. That's Edward Walter Maunder, a quite prominent British astronomer from the 19th century, mid to late 19th century, early 20th century. And this, if I understand correctly, was written in 1883. I believe in this is Edward Walter Maunder's earliest expression of his opinion, hypothesis that the winged sun symbols of Egypt and Mesopotamia were inspired by a bird-like pattern that's perceivable in the sun's corona. I have not pre-read this, but what I'm going to do is basically just start reading it, and then I may interject some commentary, if I come across something that triggers a particular thought. So I'm just going to start reading it. I'm going to read it in whole, and I may interject some commentary based on my decades worth of researching and studying how eclipses, especially total solar eclipses, influence the ancient religious beliefs and iconography of ancient humanity. There is no phenomenon of nature which is so truly impressive as a total eclipse of the sun. The beautiful pageants of the evening and the morning are too often witnessed to produce the same effect upon us, whilst the storm, the earthquake, and the volcano eruption, by the confusion and fear for personal safety they produce, render men unfit to watch their developments. But the eclipse awes and subdues by what might also be called moral means alone. No noise, no danger accompanies it. The body is not tortured, nor the mind confused by the rush of the blast, the crash of the thunder peal, the rocking of the earthquake, or the fires of the volcano. The only sense appealed to is that of sight. The movement of the orbs of heaven go on without noise or confusion, and with a majestic smoothness in which there is neither hurry nor delay. And just scroll down a bit here. Wow, great, this is not good. Yeah, this happens sometimes. Hopefully we'll find it again. I think it was on page 609, so we're getting there. Yeah, so unfortunate that. Yeah, scrolling here is a real bother. It just scrolls too quickly. Okay, and again we're a little out of sync here. Okay. The impression produced by an eclipse is not confined to dark ages, or to savage races to whom the causes of the occurrence are all unknown, and its effect is heightened beyond measure by its unforeseen and mysterious character. Scientific men, perfectly acquainted not only with the cause of the phenomenon, but also with the appearances they had to expect, have found themselves awestruck and even overwhelmed. So what he's saying is that scientists observing total solar eclipses, they already know beforehand what to expect, and yet they're still awestruck and overwhelmed when they observe a total solar eclipse. An astronomer in one eclipse failed to make any observations, and being asked how it happened, replied that he was but a man. Another records the dizziness he experienced as the awful shadow sped over the earth toward him with 100 times the speed of an express train, and how the solid tower on which he stood seemed to reel and bend beneath his feet. It was the most terrible spectacle I had ever beheld. Others cannot find words in which to express the impression produced. I'll try scrolling down here. Not too much. This is not fun. Okay, so others cannot find words in which to express the impression produced. The blackness was infernally awful, utterly unlike the soft darkness of approaching night. During one eclipse, a crowd of spectators were standing near the group of astronomers and were watching the diminished thread of sunlight. They talked, chattered, joked, and laughed as the shadow crept on, until the dread moment when the sun suddenly vanished, and then a deep silence fell on all. Not a word, not a cry, scarcely a breath could be heard. The totality lasted but 2 short minutes, yet the prevailing opinion was that shadows lie between. Maybe not. I guess we have to go to the top of the page. Yeah. So, the prevailing opinion was that they had stood there in that awful pause for full 2 hours. But a total eclipse is not all darkness and terror. It has a beauty and a glory all its own. Scarcely has the dark moon hidden the last thread of sunlight from view, then spurs of rosy light are seen around the black disk that now fills the space so lately occupied by the glorious King of Day. And these rosy spurs of light shine on a background of a pearly glory, as impressive in its beauty as the swift march of the awful shadow and the seeming descent of the darkened heavens were in terror. Not quite sure if I read that correctly. Let's try one more time. And these rosy spurs of light shine on a background of a pearly glory, as impressive in its beauty as the swift march of the awful shadow and the seeming descent of the darkened heavens were in terror. There it shines, pure, lovely, and serene, radiant with a light like molten silver, wreathing the darkened sun with a halo like that around a saintly head in some noble altarpiece, so that whilst the dreadful shadow has in some cases awed a laughing and frivolous crowd into silence, in other cases the pure radiance of that halo has forced spectators to their knees with an involuntary exclamation, the glory, as if God himself had made known his presence in the moment of the sun's eclipse. Try scrolling down without too much going too far. This beautiful halo is known to astronomers as the corona. The part of it which lies nearest the sun is much more brilliant than the outlying portions. Indeed, it is so dazzlingly bright that, like the full moon, it cannot be comfortably observed with a telescope unless a shade glass is used. This inner corona, as it's frequently called, is further distinguished from the outer by its possessing a tolerably definite outline, and it forms a regular ring around the sun, the breadth of which may average about 1/8 of the sun's diameter. The outer corona, on the contrary, is most irregular in shape and consists for the most part of long rays or streamers of light of every variety of length, breadth, and brightness, flowing from the sun in every direction, and often strongly suggesting the idea, which may possibly be very near the truth, that the sun is closely surrounded by a multitude of small comets, and that these streamers are their tails. Between these streamers there are dark spaces or rifts, strongly recalling the familiar appearance which children call the sun drinking, when the sun, shining over the irregular edges of clouds, lights up the vapor-laden air with long bright beams, whilst dark shadows lie between. But these rifts are real spaces, not shadows, for in that case they would always be straight, whereas they are often more or less curved. So much the corona shows to the eye, but in the telescope it is seen to be full of the most wild and beautiful forms. Part of it's brighter than the rest, cloud-like, thread-like, twisted and tangled, infinite in the variety of delicate form, as the tracery we find on our window panes on a frosty morning. The general appearance of the whole corona is that of a great star, 1,000 times larger than any star of the midnight sky, and with the black ball of the moon in the center, and here and there the rosy flush and weird shape of some bright prominence. The whole has been very aptly compared to a superb decoration, a star of a nobler order than the Garter of Bath, glittering on the breast of heaven itself. So I think it is worth noting here that Maunder specifically compares the sun surrounded by its corona to a great star. And what he means by that is a star with rays all around it. I mean, the stars don't actually have rays all around it, but he's basically talking about a stylized representation of a star, or indeed stylized representation of the sun, which comes from the same source. And I think it's significant that he's saying just how much larger it is than any star in the sky. The sun and the moon are considerably larger than any star in the sky, but the totally eclipsed sun with the corona surrounding it, basically the diameter of that is at least 3 times that of the sun or the moon. So it's really quite large, even to the unaided human eye without a telescope. It's a large thing to look at in the sky. I think that's important. And he's comparing it to a medal, the Garter or the Bath, glittering on the breast of heaven itself. So he's comparing it to a rayed sun-type medal. The comparison of the corona to a star does not, however, always hold equally good, for it is so far from presenting the same appearance in every eclipse, and that in no way... Sorry, let's try that again. I'll start from the beginning. The comparison of the corona to a star does not, however, always hold equally good, for it is so far from presenting the same appearance in every eclipse, that in no two is it of the same shape, brightness, or extent, but its varied appearances may perhaps be grouped under 2 principal forms, either as it sends forth beams of nearly equal length from every side, and so presents the appearance of a star, or as the outer corona consists almost entirely of 2 great streamers on opposite sides of the sun, so that the whole closely resembles the ring with wings, the symbol which on Assyrian monuments is always shown as floating over the head of the king, and which is designed to indicate the presence and protection of the deity. It is indeed by no means impossible that this symbol actually owed its origin to the revelations of a total eclipse, and not to any supposed analogy between the ring and wings and the divine attributes of eternity and power. So this is important. This is, to my knowledge, the first public expression of Edward Walter Maunder's opinion that the winged sun type of corona, which he attributed to sunspot minimum conditions, he's just suggesting that it might have inspired the Assyrian ring with wings or winged sun symbols. So here's just a suggestion. Later on, he went beyond just suggesting it. He put it down as a pretty solid hypothesis. So here he's just putting it out there in 1883. But it's obvious that he later went on to be a bit more assertive about it, shall we say. So let's scroll down and keep reading. However, this may be, the fact that the corona varies in so decided a manner from one eclipse to another is a most important fact. For the corona is not the only phenomenon belonging to the sun which varies. The dark markings on the sun, which we call spots, and which measure 50,000 miles in diameter and even more, the bright markings called faculae, and the rosy prominences are not equally frequent at all times. In 1878 and 1879, all 3 classes were but seldom seen, and when seen were only small. In 1882, all were very numerous and very large. 11 years earlier, in 1871, they also had been numerous, and again 11 years before that. So clearly, Edward Walter Maunder is either speaking from direct personal experience of observing earlier total solar eclipses, or he's speaking in terms of having read reports about earlier total solar eclipses. But in terms of his career as an astronomer, it's quite likely that Edward Walter Maunder did actually observe the eclipses he's talking about, and that can be verified. Off the top of my head, I don't know. And whoops, come back here. But that's certainly worth looking into. Up to the present time, we have had very few opportunities. Whoops, daisy, it looks like I skipped something here. Come back. In other words, the sun is very active about once every 11 years. Its activity then gradually declines for about 6 or 7 years until it is almost wholly quiescent. And then for 4 years it grows more active, displaying spots, faculae, and prominences in ever-increasing abundance until the end of another period of 11 years, after which it again begins to decline. So here he's talking about the sunspot type, the sunspot cycle, and his hypothesis regarding the winged sun symbols of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, which he wrote down in much more detail in 1897 and had published in Knowledge, a scientific journal. I'd say a popular scientific journal, something comparable to Scientific American today, or so not a sort of purely academic scientific journal, but sort of a more public, popular science type of publication. Indeed, popular science would be maybe even more comparable in the Scientific American. So anyhow, it's very clear that he's talking about the sunspot cycle and the period of time when it's in the minimum phase and then going back to maximum. Up to the present time, we have had very few opportunities for observing the corona. It has only been visible during the 2 or 3 minutes of a total eclipse, and it has only been properly watched during the last few of these. But so far as the observations go, they all tend to suggest that the corona varies at the same time as the spots, being smaller but more brilliant at the time of greatest activity, and more extended and less brilliant at the time of the least. If this be so, it lends additional importance to the inquiry, what is the corona? For if it varies with the sun's activity, it may be that we should find in it the explanation of this strange 11-year period, and of much else that is mysterious in the sun. And since the variation in the sun's activity is known to produce a most powerful effect on the magnetism of the earth, and it is suspected by many that it likewise has an influence on our harvests, our storms, our plagues, and our panics, it is clear that the corona is associated with an interest far beyond that which attaches to most of the objects of astronomical research. So it is interesting here that they're not even sure what the corona is at this point in 1883, or at least Edward Walter Maunder isn't 100% sure. But how to learn more about that? But how to learn more about it? That was the difficulty, since we could only get a glimpse of it for 2 or 3 minutes at a time and at intervals so wide apart. If it could only be seen by daylight. But that was impossible, for scarcely does the merest thread of real sunlight appear from behind the dark moon, then all the bright vision fades, overpowered by the glory that excelleth. Impossible! Never mention that stupid word to me, said Napoleon. The slothful man says, there is a lion in the way, and so Ruskin reminds us, does the brave man. But whilst the sluggard says, it will kill me, the the brave man resolves, I will kill it. And in this